I have Postman open here, and I have actually written the entire documentation for this API. It's actually quite long. And inside this documentation, I have a lot of examples. So what I'm going to do is, instead of sending each of these requests independently, I just created all these examples in advance, and you can see it here. We have an example to create a user. All these examples here. So I'm just going to show you the examples without actually just sending each of these requests, because I think that is going to take a lot of time. So I found it easier and faster to do it like this. So inside this blog API collection, as you can see, there are a few folders. There's a user, and inside this user, there is all the functionalities associated with creating a user, and these are all the possible responses, and these are just the examples in Postman. So we have, for the user, we have create, read, update, and delete a user, or I should say multiple users at a time, because I want, for my use case, I want to be able to make sure that I can delete one user, and also I can delete multiple users at the same time without actually having to delete each users independently. So, and these are all the examples again for this endpoint. And when it comes to updating a user, I want to make sure that I separate these functionalities. So we have a functionality to update a user profile, and inside that I have these examples that we will go through. Update profile, update avatar, update name, update email, update password, and we'll also be updating or managing privilege or user roles. So for my use case, a user will have a role of super user, admin, staff, client, and subscriber, and based on that user role, user will be able to access some endpoints and will be access to some of the other endpoints. So we'll come to that later. But for the purpose of this demonstration, instead of sending each of these requests manually, I just created this documentation in advance, and I created a lot of examples here, as you can see. So we'll just go through these examples. I found it easier and faster that way. So when it comes to creating a user, this is the endpoint to create a user, API/b1/auth/register. And this endpoint will expect all these fields here. You'll take first name, last name, email, password, and confirm password. Those are the fields that we need to create a user. And anybody can create a user. A user does not need to have some kind of privilege to create a new user. Anybody can register on the website or in the API. So it'll take the first name, which is Prashant, my own name, last name. I have an email, prashant@example.com. I have the password. I just set it to demo1234 exclamation for this purpose. We have a confirm password, and once this request is sent, we get a response like this. We get a status of 201, success of true. We get the user object. Inside that user object, we'll have two other objects. That is the account object and the profile object. Profile object will initially be set to an empty string, and users can always update their profile once they are actually registered into the system. But for this account object, we'll have first name, last name, email, role, and date registered. And if you notice that when creating a user, creating a new user, we actually supply the password field, which is a plain text. But once the user is actually created, we do not want to show that password field, and we'll be hashing the password. But even if the password is hashed, we do not want to be able to see that hashed password. And the other thing is the role. So in this case, when creating a user, so this is the example to, let me come over here, to create a super user. And for the response, we see that a user has been created with the role of super user. And this is, and later we'll make sure that when we create a user, we do not assign the default role of a user to be a super user. We'll assign them as either a client or subscriber. But in order to create a super user, we'll just have to tweak things a little bit, and then we'll see that when we're actually writing the API. And then we also have the date registered field, and as you can see that this date is very nicely formatted. So we'll do this completely from scratch. Also, there's some extra characters over there. I don't know what that is, but we'll figure it out when we're actually writing the code. But for now, I think that still makes sense. That's okay. So that was to create a super user. Let's create a user with the default role of subscriber. And as you can see, that first name Bobby, last name Dylan, email bobby@example.com. We have a password, we have a confirm password, and once that request is sent, we get the same thing. But right now, the role is changed. The default role is changed to subscriber, and everything else should be the same. So let's look at another example here. Create a user with formatted first name and last name. So in this example here, I'm providing the first name as Roses and last name as Water. And as you can see that the first name, the first letter of the first name is not capitalized, and same with the last name too. So when sending this request, we want to make sure that we capitalize the first name of the, or the first letter of the first name and the first letter of the last name. Sorry. So we will do this completely from scratch. Also, it's just a simple formatting. And there's another example: first name cannot be blank. So when a user tries to register into our system and does not provide any first name, we'll send this error message saying status 400, which is a bad request. And we'll say that first name is required, and first name cannot contain any white space. As you can see that the user provides the first name as DA, and there's a white space in between, VE. That's not a valid first name, so we'll say that first name cannot contain any white space. And the first name cannot be more than 32 characters. So in this case, the user is trying to provide the first name that's way too long. So for my use case, I'm not gonna allow that, but I guess some people can have first or last name greater than 32 characters. But for my use case, I'm just gonna say that first name cannot be more than 32 characters. And same with the last name. Last name cannot be blank. As you can see, we get the response, last name is required. This is also the same as the last name cannot be more than 32 characters. That's okay, it's the same thing. And this is also the white space, extra white space. The last name cannot in white space. And for the email, if the user does not supply any email, we'll just say that the email is required. Or we can always change this. It's a simple string, so for your use case, you can display whatever error message you want, but for my case, I'm just doing email is required, and that'll work. And for email already exists. So in this case, I already had a user with a super user, and let's say that if I try to create another user with the same email that's already exists in the database, we'll say status 400 bad request, and we'll say that an account with email, that email already exists, and we'll just say please use it. So that will check for the uniqueness of the email. Let's come to the email greater than 30 characters. Again, for my use case, I'm just going to keep it to that. You can always change this. It's super simple. You'll see it when we are actually building this API and writing the code. So that's email cannot be more than 32 characters. And we'll also check for the validity of the email. So in this case, the user is trying to, or the user has a extra white space in that email, which is of course not a valid email. So we'll just say that email is not valid, please enter a valid email. And all these validations, as I told you earlier, will not be using any unnecessary packages to do this. It's actually pretty simple, and I do not want to use any unnecessary packages to do simple things like this. So we'll do all the validations, all the error handlings completely from scratch, and it's actually pretty simple. I think that's a good way to learn it. So that was white space in the email, and there's another email not valid. So in this case, it does not have the username. The email does not contain any username, so that's not a valid email. So we'll just say please enter a valid email. And there's another example here. This is, it does not have the domain name dev at, it does not have the top level domain, I should say, and that's still not a valid email. So we'll just send that. And there's another validity dev at example dot, it does not have that .com or the top level domain, so that's not a valid email either. And there's another validity check dev at example, that's not a valid email. We get this response. And if the email is less than 6 characters, in this case it's not even a valid email, we'll just say that email cannot be less than 6 characters. I guess we could always tweak this. I think it would make more sense to say that email is not valid, but I'll just leave it to that. It's just a simple string that you can always change. And so I think that's all the validations for the email. And for the password, so let's say that the user supplies all the other information correctly, and the user provides the password as demo1234 exclamation, and if the user does not provide any, or the confirm password is blank, we'll just say that the confirm password and confirm password does not match. We could have also said that the confirm password is blank, but I guess we can always do that while actually developing the front end. But for the backend, in this case, the confirm password is an empty string, and the password is demo1234. They do not match, so it's better to say password and confirm password does not match. And for the password, we'll do, let's say that if the user provides confirm password as demo1234 exclamation, and if the password is left blank with empty string, we'll just say that password cannot be less than 8 characters long, because right now the password is 0 characters long. And again, while developing the front end, we could always say that password cannot be. And we'll do some password check. We want to make sure that the user supplies the strong password as possible. So in this case, the password is provided as demonstration exclamation. Confirm password matches to, but then password must meet all the following requirements. And let me actually expand that. So these are all the requirements for the password. Password must not contain any white space. Password must contain at least one uppercase letter, at least one lowercase letter, at least one digit, at least one special character, and the password must be between 8 to 256 characters long. So in this case, there is not a number. So we will throw a message saying password must meet all the following requirements. And same with the other ones. There's a lot of password validation examples here. Only one special character. There's no special characters in the password here, so we'll throw that error. And at least one uppercase or lowercase, well, in this case the uppercase letter, we'll throw that error. So these are all the password validations. So the password must meet all these requirements. I'm just going to leave it to that and not waste time showing you that. And we also have this password cannot be more than 256 characters long. In this case, the user is trying to provide password that's way too long, so we'll not allow that. And for this one, the server did not receive a valid JSON. Please try checking for syntax errors. So this error message is common to all the endpoints. So I'm not going to show you this in the other endpoints again, like when reading a user or creating a post. So here's what's happening is the user is supplying that extra comma in the end here. That's not a valid JSON, this extra comma. So we'll just say that the server did not receive a valid JSON. Try checking for syntax errors. So this is going to be common. I'm not going to probably going to show you again. And this one, first name, last name, email, password, and confirm password is required in order to create a user. But as you can see that the user is not supplying the first name, so we'll just throw that message saying that all these fields are required. And this is again also going to be common for all the endpoints which takes a post request. We do not want the user to supply any other unnecessary fields, and we want the user to supply all the fields that are necessary for that request. And this one is again the same thing. The user is supplying this extra field which we do not want to allow, so we'll just throw that error message. So that's all for the creating a user. I think I went through all the examples in order to create the user, and then we'll do this completely from scratch. Let's move on to the other endpoint. This is to read all users, and this is the endpoint to read all users, api/v1/users, and it says here that this is used to get all the users that are in the database. And for my use case, I want to be able to make sure that the user trying to get all users is actually a super user, admin, or staff. If the user is a client or subscriber, we do not want that client or subscriber to read all the users in the database. So in order to read all users, this is the endpoint here, API v1/users, and it also takes the authorization, this access token. So once the user is logged in, provides the correct access token, then we'll just display all the users that are in the database. As you can see that we get a status 200, okay, success 2. And inside that users array, we have all the users that are in the database. And inside this users object, everything is the same. We have the account, we have the profile, the password field is hidden. But we also have this post array, which is initially empty because this user does not have any post yet. But as this user creates a post, all those posts will appear in this post array. So that's to read all users. There can be errors when reading all users. So let's say that if the user is logged in, so I have the access token, but if this access token is not or does not have a sufficient privilege, if it is not a super user, admin, or staff, then we'll just throw an error saying 403, which is forbidden, and we'll just say that you must have either a super user, admin, or staff privilege to perform this operation. The other example, if the user does not provide any, that's not there. If the user does not provide any authentication or any access token or any authentication header, we'll just say that you must be authenticated to perform this operation. And the other one, so let's say that if I'm the super user, admin, or staff, and I'm logged in, and then I go somewhere for a few hours and try to send that request again, we want to make sure that this access token actually expires. We do not want the access token to not expire forever. So currently, I think the access token is set to expire in 24 hours. I'm not sure, but the access token is set to expire. So if I use the expired access token in order to read all the users, then we'll just throw an error saying something went wrong, 0 will be expired. And there's this extra something went wrong. I don't know why I have that there, but it's just a simple tweak to remove this string, and that should be good. So that's access token has expired. We can also say that the session has expired. And the other example is, so in this endpoint, if the user provides the authorization, there's a JWT keyword there, but it does not have any access token. So in that case, we'll just say that we'll ask the user to provide the actual auth header. So that's an error. We'll let the user know. And JWT malformed. So let's say that if the user provides some access token, and this access token is quite long, but I removed some of the characters from there. So this is not a valid JSON web token that is generated by JWT. So in that case, we'll just say something went wrong, JWT malformed, and again, this extra string there, we can just remove that, and that should be okay. So that's all for the reading all users. Let's look at read a single user. So in order to read a single user, anybody can read a user. User does not have to be logged in. They do not need to have any special privilege. So in order to read a single user, the endpoint is v1/user and the user ID of the user that we would like to read. So in order to read a single user, we just provide the user ID that we would like to read. And if the request succeeds, then we'll get a status 200. We'll get the user object and we'll get the profile object just like before. And also we'll get the post array just like before. And in this case, this user does not have any posts. So that's why this post array is empty. But again, as soon as the user creates post, then we'll actually see the post in this post array. So that's to read a single user. That was a success. So invalid user ID. So in MongoDB, the ID can be certain characters long. So in this case, I'm trying to access user with this ID here, and I provided some extra characters in there. And of course, this is not a valid user ID. So in that case, we'll just say invalid user ID. And user does not exist. So let's say that if I try to get or read a user with this ID here, so this is a valid ID on top. As you can see that it has number 9 in the end. But this one, I just tweaked it, changed it to number 1, and this is this user, user with this ID does not exist. So that's why we say that the user. And I think that's all for the reading a user. There's not much going on. It's simple get request. So let's come to updating a user. In order to update a user, and again, we'll do this independently. We'll update the profile, avatar, first name, last name, email, password, and role. So in order to update a profile, this is the endpoint API/b1/user/update/, and then we will need the user ID of the user that we would like to update the profile for. And the profile field will take a job title and a bio. We'll just provide a job title as musician. We'll write a bio as the most influential musician of all time. And if the profile has been successfully updated, we get this response saying job title, musician, bio, the most influential of all time. Let's look at other example. There's actually quite a lot going on here. So this example, you must be authenticated to perform this operation. So we want to make sure that when updating a user profile, only the logged in user, I can only update my profile or my email or password. No other users can update my information. So we want to make sure that we do that, because we do not want some random users changing our information. So for that case, this is the request here. We'll send a request, we'll provide the ID, and also we will provide the JSON web token that I actually don't see here. Will need to be logged in. Well, in this case, this is a different example. It says that you must be authenticated to perform this operation. So if the user is not logged in, we'll just say that you must be authenticated to perform this operation. And again, this is a JSON has expired, which is just JWT expired. As I explained earlier, this access token has already expired. So in order to update the profile, the user will have to log back in and then update the profile. And this is the one that I was talking about. This is a privilege error. So you do not have sufficient privilege to perform this operation. So the user is providing this ID over here, but then this access token is not associated with this user ID. So in this case, the user is trying to update some other user's information, which is not allowed. So that's why we say that you do not have sufficient privilege to the operation. And again, the server did not receive a validation. I explained this earlier. I'm not going to go through that. And again, extra fields, only job title and bio is required. There's other the extra field in there that's not allowed. And same with this one, job title is required too, that's not allowed. I'm not going to go through that again. JWT malformed, I explained this already. And the auth header, I explained this already. Let's move on to updating an avatar. In order to update the avatar, the endpoint is the same. We need to provide the correct user ID. So API/v1/user/update/avatar and the user ID of the so that we would like to update. This is the same as updating the profile. We want to make sure that only the logged in user can update their profile and nobody else. Only the logged in user can update their avatar and nobody else. So if everything is correct, this is the first example here. The response is the avatar has been updated, and this is the file that is uploaded. And we'll come to this, how to format this or where to store this file. So we'll come to that later when we're actually writing the code. But in this case, this request will take a file field and we'll just update the file. And if everything goes correctly, we'll get a success status 200, and we'll update that picture and store that picture in the system. There's another example here. Again, this is the authentication issue. In this case, the access token is not provided. This is the not sufficient privilege. I talked about this. I don't want to go through that again. Session has expired. It's the same thing. File size cannot be more than 1 MB. So I want to make sure that when the user uploads a profile picture, I want to make sure that the file size is not greater than 1 MB. So in this case, this file here, desktop/bobby-.jpg, this file is way more than 1 MB, so I do not want to allow that. If the file size is more than 1 MB, I'll just display a message saying that file size cannot be more than 1 MB, and the user will have to either reduce the file size or pick another image. And same thing with the file format. I only want to be able to allow JPEG, JPG, or PNG file. In this case, the user is trying to upload the SVG file, I guess, which is okay. But for my use case, I'm only gonna allow JPEG, JPG, or PNG file. And again, this is the same as before. If the user does not provide the avatar field, which is a file field, because nothing is provided, we'll just say that, oh, well, we have this something went wrong, and I actually had this database message displayed here. I guess we could just remove that and change that string there. It's a simple tweak. I forgot to do that, but that should still make sense. ZWT malformed. As I said earlier, there's something wrong with the access token. The user is messing around with the access token. That's not okay. Auth header, again, the same as before. Let's move on to updating a name. So I'm trying to update the name. This is the endpoint here, API user update/name/the ID of the user that I would want to update. And I would want to update the first name of the user to Rob and last name to Zimmerman. And if the name update is successful, then we provide the access token just like everything, just like before. And then we get the success message saying that the name has been updated, and this is the updated name. And also we want to make sure, let me see the examples here, and then format name before updating. That is just like when creating a user. If the user provides if the user does not capitalize the first letter of the first name or first letter of the last name, we want to make sure that just like when creating a user, we want to format that first name. So that's that. And again, session has expired. We already went through that. Authenticated, we already went through that. Sufficient privilege, the user is trying to update some other user's information, which is not allowed. So that's good. First name cannot contain any white space. We already went through that when creating a user. In this case, the user is trying to have that extra white space in the first name, which is not allowed. Same with the first name is required. Nothing is provided. That's why we throw that first name is required. Last name, again, same thing. Last name cannot be blank is the same thing. Server did not respond is the same thing. I'm not going to go through that again. But besides that, all the other things are same. This is, again, the user is not providing any access token or the auth header. So that should work. Updating an email. This is the endpoint here, API v1/update or /user/update/email and the ID. And once the user provides the email and the password, the new email and the password, like that, provides the access token and everything, we throw the status of 200, email has been updated, and you can see that the email has indeed been updated. And these are all the same kind of examples. This is the authentication, session has expired, I already went through that. Sufficient privilege, email cannot be blank. So all these are same, but the one thing I would like to show you is, because email, when updating an email is actually quite sensitive, it's a security issue. So we want to make sure that when the user is trying to update an email, we want to ask for the password. We want to ask the user, enter your password, provide your password in order to update the email, because we want to make sure that only the authorized user can update the email. So that's why the updating the email will take the email field itself and also the password, just to confirm the identity that is trying to update the email. Once the password is provided and the password is correct, well, in this case, the password is not provided, password cannot be blank. But if the user does not provide a correct password, demo1234, and you can see that this is the correct password, but then the user is adding some extra exclamation and @ which is not a correct password for that user. So we'll just say password is not correct. And this is just a validation. Email and password is required. Again, if the user provides some extra fields, we don't want that. And in this case, the user is not even providing the password. So we'll just say email and password is required to update the email. Data malformed. Again, this is the same thing as before. Auth header is just the same thing as before. So let's come to updating a password. This is the endpoint here. In order to update a password, we need the old password of the user, we need the new password, and we also need the confirm new password. And we want to make sure that, again, the user is only trying to update their own password and not the password of somebody else. So the user will provide the old password. The user will provide the new password. User will provide the confirm new password. And again, these passwords must match or must meet all those requirements of uppercase, lowercase letter, and special character and length. So we'll still check for that even when updating the password. But if everything is correct, if the user supplies the correct old password and the new password meets all those requirements, we'll just throw a status 200 saying that the password has been updated, but we do not actually want to see that hashed password. And we'll actually hash those passwords. When we are developing this, we'll look at it in the MongoDB database. We'll see that the password is actually hashed, and we'll do that using a package called Bcrypt. It makes it a lot easier to do that, but we'll come to that later when we're actually writing the code. And this is the other example. Same with the authentication issue. I don't want to go through that. Session expired, sufficient privilege, that's good. And the new thing here is old password is not correct. So the old password was demo1234 exclamation @ that was the correct password, but the user is trying to provide the old password. The user is missing extra @ in the end. That's not the correct password. So we'll say that the old password is not correct, and the user will not be able to change the password until the user provides the correct old password. And again, this is the same as when creating a user. Password and confirm password does not match. In this case, it does not have the exclamation. And all these other ones are just the password validation check that we already went through when creating a user. And we'll do this completely from scratch too. But all the other examples, it should be the same as before. When updating a role, this is super sensitive. For my use case, I want to make sure that only a super user can update other users' role. I do not want even admin or staff to be able to update the role, because if they can update the role, they can actually update a super user role. So let's say that if the admin tries to update my role, which is I'm a super user, the admin can update my role from super user to subscriber, and then I lose all the access to my system. So I do not want that, and of course there are other ways to handle it, but for my use case, I'm only going to be able to allow the super user, myself, to update the user role. So here's the success example here. We provide the role as a client. This is the new role to be updated, because this user with this ID was actually a subscriber. That was the default role. But then we want to update the user's role from subscriber to client. And then when updating the role, we want to make sure that the super user password is provided. If the super user password is not provided, we'll throw some errors, which we will see it later. But if everything succeeds, then we'll just say that the user's role has been updated. And now you can see that Rob Zimmerman, before he was a subscriber, now he is an admin. So let me see. Yeah, I'm actually trying to update this as an admin. So not a client. I shouldn't be looking at that. I'm trying to update Rob Zimmerman's role from subscriber to an admin. And then once I provide that, once I send that request, we'll update the Rob Zimmerman's role from subscriber admin. And now this user will have much higher privilege than he had. So that was the success. And again, this is the authentication issue. We already went through that. Session expired. We already went through that. Password is not correct. This is the same like with updating the email or updating the password. The user must provide a correct password in order to update the role. In this case, this is not the super user password. The super user password had an exclamation in the end, not the super user password. This is not the correct password. So we'll just say that the password is And again, password cannot be blank, it must be provided. And then role cannot be blank either. A role must be, I should say, either a super user, admin, staff, client, or subscriber. So those are the 5 roles that are allowed. If the user provides some other roles, or if the role is empty, we'll just say that the role is required. And let's look at this one. So, and in this case, the user is trying to update the user's role from, or the super user is trying to update the user's role from a valid role to a role of other, which is not a valid role. So we'll just say that role can only be assigned as either super user. Let me expand that. Super user, admin, staff, client, or subscriber. So we'll throw that error because role cannot be other. It has to be one of the enums here. This is basically an enumeration. That's how we handle this, and we'll go through this when we're writing the code. And this is just a validity of the JSON. There's extra comma. We already went through that. And that's just the extra field there. We don't allow that. And besides that, everything, all the other examples should be the same. So that's for the updating the user. And let's come to delete a user. In order to delete a user, I want to make sure that for my use case, I want to make sure that I can delete one user, or I can also delete multiple users at a time. So this is the endpoint to delete user or users, the API/v1/user/delete. And this request will take the ID of the users to be deleted. So in this case, I provided 2 IDs of the user that I want to delete. And also, just like before, this is very sensitive. I only want to make sure that for my use case, I want to make sure that only the super user can delete a single user or multiple users. I do not want even the other privileged user like admin or staff to be able to delete user, because if they can do that, then they can actually delete myself, and then I lose. And then the super user loses all the access to the system. So I do not want that. For my use case, I only want the super user to be able to delete. So this is the request to delete multiple users. I provide the super user access token. I log in, provide the super user access token, and I provide the ID of the user that I want to delete. And once I send that, we'll get this nice count here saying 2 users have been deleted. So that was to delete multiple users. In order to delete one user, we just provide the ID of the user we want to delete. And then it'll again return the count. 1 users have been deleted. It would have made more sense to call it just user and not an extra s in there. But I guess that's okay. It's just a simple tweak. And this is again the authentication issue. We did that. Session expired. We did that. You must be a super user to perform this operation. We went through that. And besides that, everything else we already went through that. It's just the same response, same logic. So that's for the user. We have all the functionalities to create, read, update, and delete user or users. So that should be it for the users. Let's come to the auth here. So in this photo is basically used to log in a user. This is the endpoint API/v1/auth/login. In order to log in, the user need to provide the email and the correct password, valid email and a valid or a correct password. And if everything succeeds, if everything is okay, then we'll just through a status 200 success was true. We'll just also display the message login successful. And upon successful login, the user will get this access token that this user can use to perform some other request in the API. So all it does is that it returns a user object with access token, and this is super important. So that was a successful login, and this is logged in as super user, successful login as a subscriber. So this Rogers as example.com is a subscriber. And then again, it's the same thing. It's just a different access token. And whenever we use this access token, we'll have to know if this access token belongs to a super user, admin, staff, client, or subscriber, so that we can handle the privilege like. And email cannot be blank. The same thing. Could not find an account with that email. So if the user is trying to log in, and if the email is not correct, we'll just say could not find an account with that email, because an account with p@example.com, that does not exist. We'll do that. Password cannot be blank. Same thing. Password is not correct. So for this email here, prashant@example.com, the password was demo1234 exclamation. In this case, the user is trying to supply the incorrect password. It is testing 1234 exclamation. That's not a correct password for this account. So we'll just say password is not correct. And then this is again the server did not receive a valid JSON because of extra comma. Email and password is required. Same thing. It's missing the password field. And this is also the same thing. There's an extra field other over there, which is, so that's all for the login and auth. Let's come to the category. So our category will have all these functionalities: create a category, read category, read all categories, read a single category, update a category, and delete a category or categories. So we can delete one category or multiple categories at once. This is the endpoint to create a category. So API/v1/category/create. And for my use case, I want to be able to have the super user, admin, or staff to be able to create a category. The client and subscribers, they cannot create a category. So we'll check for that, just like we checked when trying to update a user role. So it's quite similar to that. Not much going on here. So in order to create a category, the category will take these two fields, slug and name. So slug in this case is API-development. Name is API-development. The access token is provided. This access token belongs to a user with a privilege of either super user, admin, or staff. So that'll be a success. We get the status 201, which is created. And we get a success true message, category API development has been created. And then we get a nice category object. And inside that object, we have this created at whenever the category was created. As you can see that this state is again nicely formatted. I do not know why that's coming up, but then we'll fix that later when we are actually writing the API. We have a slug, we have name, and also a category will have post associated with it. So in this case, the post array is initially empty because we have not created any post that actually belongs to that category. But once a post is created, we'll need to assign that post to a category, and we'll see all those posts here in this. So that was a success. Let's look at the other example. So a category was already created. So let's say that if I try to create another category with the same slug, then that's not a valid. It's just like with email, the emails must be unique. So in this case, the category slug must be unique. So in this case, I'm trying to create the same category again, which I just did. API-development, that category already exists. So we'll say status 400, which is a bad request. We'll say that a category with the slug API-development already exists, and choose a new category. And this is again, session has expired. I'm not going to go through that. You must be authenticated. The user must be authenticated and be a super user, admin, or staff to create a category. Sufficient privilege, the user cannot be a client or subscriber to create a category. So cannot be blank. It's the same thing as before. I don't think there's much going on here. We have already gone through all these other examples. It's quite same. So I'm just going to leave it to that. In order to read a category, let's come to that. The endpoint is API/v1/category and slash the name of the slug of the category, because I think this is more readable. Instead of trying to read a category with an ID, we just read a category with a nice slug here. We know that a category with a slug API-development exists, so we would rather use that slug in the URL and make it more readable. But while reading a user, I believe we used an ID. This is more readable, so it's good. In order to read a category, anybody can read a category. You do not have to be logged in or anything like that. All we do is just send a request to this endpoint and write the name of the category or the slug of the category in the URL. And if the request succeeds, then we get a status 200. We get this category object. We created as slug name post, which is initially empty. Let's look at other example. Category does not exist. So when trying to read a category, so in this case, I'm trying to read a category called API, which does not exist. A category called API-development does exist, but not just the API. Category does not exist, so we'll just say that the category does not exist. So that's all it for reading a category. There's not much going on here. It's a simple GET request. And then there's another one is read all categories. We want to make sure that we can read all categories at once. And again, the user does not have to be logged in. All we have to do is this is the endpoint API/v1/categories, and this will just return all the categories that are in the database. Right now, there's two categories in the database: API-development and software-development. So these are only two categories that are in the system. Again, there's no any post, so that's why the post array is empty. Read all categories, and let's say that when reading all categories, if there's no any categories that is created in the system, then we'll just write a nice error message, or not, it's really an error message, but we'll just display a message saying there are no any categories. Updating a category, we want to make sure that this is the endpoint to update a category, API/v1/category, and we can grab this category with an ID. We do not well, we don't have to make this more readable, because updating a category, we don't really have to access it by a slug. We could do that, but I'm just gonna access that category with an ID, and we want to make sure that only the super user, admin, and staff can update the category. The client and subscriber cannot update the category. So in this case, I'm trying to update. I have a category here called front-end development, front-end dash development. That's a slug. I'm trying to update this category name and then change the name to software development and slug to software dash development. And once everything succeeds, once the access token of the super user, admin, or staff is provided, and once the correct category ID is provided, we'll just throw a status 200. So let me expand that. Message category has been updated. So now that category has been updated from front-end development to software development. So that's good. Updating a category. Again, session has expired. User need to log in again in order to update that. Besides that, everything else is the same. Just like with the user, we looked at all these examples. I'm not going to go through that again. Deleting category or categories. This is just like with the deleting a user, but I want to make sure that only the super user, admin, and staff can delete a category, and the client and subscriber cannot. The user must be authenticated and have a privilege of super user, admin, or staff to delete a category. And also when deleting a category, all posts associated with the deleted category we don't want to delete the post that is associated with the category. But once the category is deleted, what happens to all those posts? So what we'll do is we'll just move all those posts to a default category called other, and we'll still retain that post, but the category will actually be deleted. So this is the request here. In order to delete one category, I just provide the category ID, I provide the access token, and this is the endpoint here, API/p1/category/delete. And once everything is correct, we'll just again return the count. One category is, again, this could have been category, have been deleted, but that's okay. Delete multiple categories, just like we're deleting user or users. We just provide the ID of the categories that we would like to delete, and we'll get a message saying 2 categories have been deleted. And besides that, all the other things, all the other examples are the same as before. I'm not going to go through that again. Let's come to post. It's the same thing as the user and category, just a little bit different functionality. We have the functionality to create, read, update, and delete a post or posts. And I want to be able to delete one post or multiple posts at a time. This is all similar to the category. So in order to create a post, this is the endpoint here, API/v1/post/create. And in order to create a post, the user must be super user, admin, or staff. Client or subscriber cannot create a category. For my use case, and this is really just a simple tweak, if this API is super flexible, once you watch this video from beginning to end, I'm sure you'll get a lot of understanding, and tweaking or changing things after that is going to be super easy. So you don't have to make exactly like what I have here. It's super flexible. I'm 100% sure that you'll be able to extend this API or change things in this API to make it work the way you want. But anyways, when creating a post, we have the access token, and when creating a post, we want to make sure that the user supplies all those fields: title, excerpt, body. We also have a read time. So a lot of posts these days have a read time. We also have a category. When creating a post, the post must be assigned to a category. So in this case, we write the category name, API development. We already have this category. We provide the slug, post-5, and the slug can be changed. It does not have to be the same as the title. We also provide the status of draft and visibility of private. And this can also be 2 values, just like with role. Role can only be 5 possible values: super user, admin, staff, client, and subscriber. In the same way, status can be either draft or published, and visibility can be either private or public. So we'll look at that, another example there. But once everything is provided, we'll get, and if everything looks good, we'll get the status 201 message saying post has been created. We get a post object. Again, in that post object, we note that the creation date of the post, and in this case, the date is again formatted. We have all the other things here. And when creating a post, the read time was supplied as 15 only. So if we come to this request here, there's only read time is provided as 15 minutes, but we can always change the format of that. But in this case, when the user provides read time as 15, then we just add extra string in there saying minute read. I think that makes more sense. Status visibility is the same. We have a category. So because since this post was assigned a category of API development, so we just write the category name, and then when actually that post is created, we get the category object with the actual slug and name of the category. And we also get the author object because we want to make sure, we want to know who created the post. So we have the author. Inside that author object, we have account. We only want to know the first name, last name, and date registered of this user, and we want the profile of that user or the author. We want information of the that we can display it in the web page or in a blog. So that's that. And let's look at the other example here. Post with that slug already exists. This is again checking for the uniqueness, just like with email when creating a user, and category when creating and slug when creating a category. In this case, the user is trying to create a post with this slug here, post s5, which we already have. So if that is the case, we'll just say that something went wrong. A post with the slug post 5 already exists, and we'll ask the. And again, the user need to be authenticated. They need to have a privilege. This is the access token here. Come to the other one, session expired, we did that. Authentication, we did that. And this one, so let's say that when creating a post must be assigned to a category. So in this request here, everything else looks good, but in category, the user is, when creating a post, the user is trying to have that post in a category called web development, and this category does not exist yet. So if that is the case, we'll just say that category does not exist. Please create a new category, and we can also make this more readable, saying that category does not exist. Create a new category, and then create a post. So we could say that. So the other example is slug cannot be blank, and all the other things should be the same. And same thing again with status. So in this case, the user is trying to provide this status as other. That's not valid. Status can be either draft or published. So in this case, the user is trying to provide other, some random values. So we'll just say that status can only be assigned either draft or published. And same, visibility cannot be blank. It's the same thing as before. Visibility must be assigned either public or private. In this case, is trying to assign the other, which is valid. Server did not receive validation. These are all the same. Yeah, everything else looks the same. Let's move on to reading all posts. Anybody can read all posts. They do not have to be logged in. It's public endpoint. So api/v1/posts. And if there are no any posts, if the number of posts is 0, then we'll just say that there are no any posts. And this is the endpoint here, api/v1/post. Let's get the other example. If there are actual posts in the system and we send this request, we actually get all the posts. It is 200. Get the post array, and inside this post array, we have post 1, post 2, and we have post 3, and we have post 4. And all these posts, this post array, or each of these posts will have all the information. It will also have the category information, author information. So that way, it is super easy to display the post in the web page. It's really easy to read all posts. So that should be it for read all posts. Read a post, anybody can read a single post. They don't have to be authenticated. And just like with the category, we will read a post with a slug and not with an ID. So in this case, we are trying to read a post with a slug post -5. And once we send this request, and if everything looks good, we'll get this response here. We try to access post s5, and then we get that actual post s5, and then we get all the other information just like we. That's a read a post. And again, if this is the correct slug here, but if the user tries to access a post that does not exist or provide some invalid slug, so this is the slug here, post s6 as does not exist. So this is not the correct slug for the post. So we'll just say that the post with that slug does not. So updating a post, we'll update a post with an ID, just like with the category. We want to make sure that only the super user, admin, and staff can update the post. And let's look at this. We provide the access token, must be super user, admin, or staff. We provide the ID of the post we'd like to update. And we also provide all these fields that the post requires. So once we do that, if everything looks good, we'll get this response, we'll get this updated post object. This post object will have all the updated information. In this case, post 5 was updated. The slug is post -5 at least 5 that's updated. There are a few other things that were updated in this one too. Excerpt and body were updated, read time were updated, and this status and visibility was also updated. category. I think category was also updated, so that's good. We still have the author. Author, I guess, cannot be updated. I'm just, for my particular use case, I'm just going to leave it to that. Post has been updated. Let's look at the other example here. Session has expired. We looked at that. This one we looked at. Category does not exist. So this one is again when trying to create a post, and if we assign a category of a post to some category that does not exist, then we'll just say, in this case, the front end development category does not exist. So we'll just say that category does not exist. Create a new category first. And besides that, title, except all the body is empty. Everything blank, nothing can be blank. So we'll check for that. And again, the status can only be assigned as either draft or published. We did that when creating a post, so I'm not gonna go through that again. It's the same thing. Besides that, everything is the same. Let's come to delete a post. We want to make sure that did I say that we were able to delete one or multiple posts? I was wrong. In this case, I can only delete one post at a time. That's how I have implemented it. So this is the endpoint to delete a single post. So for this particular endpoint, the only one item or only one post can be deleted and not multiple ones. But for the category, we can delete single or multiple categories at once. And as I said, that this is super flexible. Once you go through all this, if you watch this video from beginning to end, you could easily make this happen. You could easily delete a single or multiple at a time. But for just for the purpose of this video, I change things a little so that you gain more understanding of how to make things work. So in order to delete a post, this is the URL api/v1/post-delete, and we also need the post ID of the post that we would like to delete. When deleting a post, I do not want client or subscriber to delete a post. Only the super user, admin, or staff can delete the post. We provide the access token. We'll check the user role, and then we'll provide the ID of the post that we'd like to delete. Once everything succeeds, once everything is okay, we'll get a status 200 posts have been deleted. And again, this is the authentication issue. User must be authenticated. Session has expired. Subscription privilege. This one is quite new here. Something went wrong. Cannot read properties of null. Reading author. Let me see. This one was, so we provided the ID of the post we'd like to delete, and we provide the access token. So I am not sure what this is, but we'll come to this later. Cannot read properties of null reading author. Because when a post is deleted, we need to delete it from the categories array, and we also need to delete it from the post array. But that should have worked. I'm not quite sure what this error message is. But again, when something like this happens, we can just remove or not print out this database error and just leave it to something went wrong. That'll still make sense. But we'll come to this later when we're actually writing the code. And ZWT malformed, we looked at that. Post invalid post ID. So this is like with the user, if the post ID is not valid. In this case, this is a valid post ID, but I guess over here, I'm adding all these extra characters there in the ID. So that's not a valid ID. So the invalid post ID. And this is the invalid request. In this case, the same as before, the not providing any access token there. So we get this invalid request. So that's really all for this API. We have user category post. We can log in user to a system. We can do all that things. But the next thing I would like to do is, let's go ahead and we'll build this. But I wanted to say that all this documentation, it's super important to create documentation for an API. So let's say that you build an API today, you write an API today, and then you come back to it 2 months or 3 months after, and then if you don't have the documentation, it's such pain in the back. So it's always better to actually generate an API or generate a documentation. It makes it so easier. But for the purpose of this video, generating a documentation like this is not a scope of this video. I'll probably make a new video about that, how to generate a documentation using Postman. It's fairly super simple. But besides that, for now, I think this should be good. So let's go ahead and start building this API.